A human being is not in pursuit of happiness, but rather in search of a reason to be happy. Once the reason is found, one becomes happy automatically.
Men are most apt to kill when they feel overcome by meaninglessness. You should consider the fact that after all, this was the lesson I had to learn in Auschwitz and other concentration camps. That those prisoners who were oriented toward the future, toward a meaning to fulfill in the future, were most likely to survive.
Viktor Frankl. His book, Man's Search for Meaning, has sold over 2 million copies and continues to be read by prisoners, patients in hospices, anyone besieged by doubts about what life's all about. He was still a young neurological doctor in 1920s Vienna when he came up with his theory that we find the answers to our problems in the wider world and the choices we make. This was in stark contrast to his neighbor Freud, who believed unhappiness was a result not of conscious decisions, but the fault of our subconscious. Frankl was an optimist and thought no matter how bad things get, there's always meaning in our lives. But like some sadistic cosmic joke, he got the chance to test his theory because Frankl was Jewish.
What you see here is a family tree going back over many, many rabbis.
Alexander Vesely, Victor's grandson.
In the end, you see Rabbi Löw here somewhere. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 generations through his mother. Rabbi Löw was the famous Wunderrabbi of the Jewish ghetto in Prague. The legend says that he created the so-called golem, a being made out of clay. The golem was there to protect the Jews from harm from the Gentiles. At that time, they were having pogroms in Prague.
Victor was part of an era here in Vienna, which was, of course, an intellectual center.
Hayden Klingberg, a friend and biographer of Viktor Frankl.
Along with the nihilistic philosophers, his high school teacher did make a comment in class, life is nothing more than oxidation. While it was very rude for a boy at that time in a Viennese school to stand up without being called upon, he did so and challenged his teacher.
I wouldn't subscribe to a sentence included in a letter that Sigmund Freud once wrote to Princess Bonaparte, when he said, at the moment a man doubts or asks the question, what is the value of his life, doubts the meaning of his existence, he is sick. I don't think that he's really sick. I rather think that this is a manifestation of his state of being human, truly human. No ant, no bee, no animal will ever raise the question whether or not its existence has a meaning, but man does.
Frankl was very frustrated as time passed with the way psychoanalysis reduced everything human comes down to something unconscious, something sexual, and so nothing is authentic. Everything is a sign or a symptom of something else. And for Frankl, that was a dehumanizing way to look at human beings, that they were these mechanisms driven mainly by unconscious dynamics. In Vienna, when Hitler was coming to town, the streets were filled with people cheering the advent of the Nazi rule in Vienna, and he happened to be scheduled to speak in the Rania Theater that evening on anxiety as a sign of our time. His audience was mainly Jewish people. Early in his lecture, a couple of uniformed brown shirts came into the auditorium and stood by its doorways, and he said he was certain they were going to break up the meeting, and said I cranked up the full power of my oratory, and he said they did not move from their spot until I had finished my lecture some 45 minutes later. He had a bit of the entertainer in him, but I think it was driven by his prophetic sense of the real heart of his message.
"1,500 persons had been travelling by train for several days and nights. The engine's whistle had an uncanny sound. Everyone expected the train to head for some munitions factory in which we would be employed as forced labour. Suddenly a cry broke from the ranks of the anxious passengers. "There's a sign! Auschwitz!" With the progressive dawn, the outlines of an immense camp became visible. We did not realize the meaning behind the scene that was to follow presently. We were told to leave our luggage in the train and to fall into two lines, women on one side, men on the other, in order to file past a senior SS officer. Surprisingly enough, I had the courage to hide my haversack under my coat. Instinctively, I straightened on approaching the officer so that he would not notice my heavy load. Then I was face to face with him. He was a tall man who looked slim and fit in his spotless uniform. What a contrast to us. He had assumed an attitude of careless ease, supporting his right elbow with his left hand. His right hand was lifted, and with the forefinger of that hand he pointed very leisurely to the right or to the left. None of us had the slightest idea of the sinister meaning behind that little movement of a man's finger, pointing now to the right and now to the left, but far more frequently to the left. It was my turn. The SS man looked me over, appeared to hesitate, then put both his hands on my shoulders. I tried very hard to look smart, and he turned my shoulders very slowly until I faced right. And I moved over to that side.
My mother died, was also brought to Auschwitz and immediately sent to the gas chamber. Immediately, yeah, to the left side, as it was called. Evil is necessary in order to perceive the good, because of the contrast. And my answer has always been, if this is so, God is the Almighty. Couldn't He build a world, create a world which doesn't need the contrast?
Yeah.
I tried to take one of the old prisoners into my confidence. Approaching him furtively, I pointed to the roll of paper in the inner pocket of my coat and said, "Look, this is the manuscript of a scientific book. I know what you'll say, that I should be grateful to escape with my life, that should be all that I can expect of fate. But I can't help myself. I must keep this manuscript at all costs. It contains my life's work. Do you understand that?" Yes, he was beginning to understand. A grin spread slowly over his face, first piteous, then more amused, mocking, insulting, until he bellowed one word at me in answer to my question: "Shit." At that moment I saw the plain truth and did what marked the culminating point of the first phase of my psychological reaction. I struck out my whole former life. While my cold hands clasped a bowl of hot soup from which I sipped greedily, I happened to look out of the window. The corpse, which had just been removed, stared in at me with glazed eyes. 2 hours before, I had spoken to that man. Now I continued sipping my soup. If my lack of emotion had not surprised me from the standpoint of professional interest, I wouldn't remember this incident now, because there was so little feeling involved in it. One morning I heard someone whom I knew to be brave and dignified cry like a child because he finally had to go to the snowy marching grounds in his bare feet, as his shoes were too shrunken for him to wear. In those ghastly minutes I found a little bit of comfort, a small piece of bread which I drew out of my pocket and munched with absorbed delight. To avoid attacks of typhus delirium, I tried to keep awake for most of the night. For hours I composed speeches in my mind. Eventually, I began to reconstruct the manuscript which I had lost in the disinfection chamber of Auschwitz, and scribbled the key words in shorthand on tiny scraps of paper.
And you won't believe it, gray hair of my age, I started taking flying lessons recently. Do you know what my flying instructor told me? If you are starting here, wish to get here, and you have a crosswind, you will drift and you will land here. So you have to do what we pilots call crabbing, he told me, C-R-A-B, crabbing. You have to head for north of this airfield. This holds also for man, I would say. If we take man as he really is, we make him worse. But if we overestimate him, it's premature, your applause, you will soon know why. If we seem to be idealists and are overestimating, overrating man, and looking at him that high, here above, you know what happens? We promote him to what he really can be. So we have to be idealists in a way, because then we'll wind up as the real realists. And you know who has said this? If we take man as he is, we make him worse. But if we take man as he should be, we make him capable of becoming what he can be. This was not my flight instructor, this was not me, this was Goethe. He said this verbally. And now you will understand why I, in one of my writings, once said, this is the most apt maxim for any psychotherapeutic activity. So if you don't recognize a young man's will to meaning, man's search for meaning, you make him worse, you make him dull, you make him frustrated, you still add and contribute to his frustration. While if you presuppose in this man, if in this so-called criminal or juvenile delinquent or drug abuse and so forth, there must be a what we call spark, a spark of search for meaning. Let's recognize this, let's presuppose it, and then you will elicit it from him, and you will make him become what he in principle is capable of becoming.
There were shouted commands. Detachment forward march. Left 2, 3, 4, left 2, 3, 4, left 2, 3, 4, left 2, 3, 4. Caps off. These words sound in my ears even now. Hardly a word was spoken. The icy wind didn't encourage talk. Hiding his mouth behind his upturned collar, the man marching next to me whispered suddenly, "If our wives could see us now, I do hope they're better off in their camps and don't know what's happening to us." As we stumbled on for miles, slipping on icy spots, supporting, dragging one another up and onward, nothing was said. But we both knew. Each of us was thinking of his wife. Occasionally, I looked at the sky, where the stars were fading and the pink light of the morning was beginning to spread behind a dark bank of clouds. But my mind clung to my wife's image, imagining it with an uncanny acuteness. I heard her answering me, saw her smile, her frank and encouraging look. Real or not, her look was then more luminous than the sun which was beginning to rise. A thought transfixed me. For the first time in my life I saw the truth as it is set into song by so many poets, proclaimed as the final wisdom by so many thinkers, the truth that love is the ultimate and the highest goal to which man can aspire. Then I grasped the meaning of the greatest secret that human poetry and human thought and belief have to impart. The salvation of man is through love and in love. I understood how a man who has nothing left in this world still may know bliss. This intensification of inner life helped the prisoner find a refuge from the emptiness. In my mind, I took bus rides, unlocked the front door of my apartment, answered my telephone, switched on the electric lights. Our thoughts often centered on such details, and these memories could move one to tears. We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms: to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And there were always choices to make. Every day, every hour offered the opportunity to make a decision which determined whether you would or would not submit to those powers which threatened to rob you of your very self, your inner freedom. In the final analysis, it becomes clear that the sort of person the prisoner became was the result of an inner decision and not the result of camp influences alone. Dostoevsky said once, "There is only one thing that I dread, not to be worthy of my sufferings." These words frequently came to my mind after I became acquainted with those martyrs whose behavior in camp, whose suffering and death bore witness to the fact that the last inner freedom cannot be lost. It can be said that they were worthy of their sufferings. It is this spiritual freedom which cannot be taken away that makes life meaningful and purposeful. I remember how one day a foreman secretly gave me a piece of bread which I knew he must have saved from his breakfast ration. It was far more than the small piece of bread which moved me to tears at that time. It was the human something which this man also gave to me, the word and look which accompanied the gift. From all this we may learn that there are two races of men in this world, but only these two, the race of the decent man and the race of the indecent man. Both are found everywhere. They penetrate into all groups of society. No group consists entirely of decent or indecent people. In this sense, no group is of pure race.
When Frankl was liberated, he immediately took a stand against collective guilt, which in the context of the Holocaust is to blame all German people for that disaster. It became a very sore point between him and some Jews, not all by any means. He was asked many times over the course of his life, why ever did you come back to Vienna after what had happened to your family? And he says, why not? The tables had turned in Vienna, so now the former Nazi Party members who had been medical administrators and leaders in the medical community now were out of work. And he, Viktor Frankl, one of the few returning Jews, was given a rather prominent post in the Polyclinic Hospital in Vienna. And there was a Nazi Party member who was out of work and was discouraged, and someone told him, if you'd like to practice neurology in some way, you should go and talk to Viktor Frankl at the Polyclinic. He went to Frankl, And Frankl took him in at the polyclinic and allowed him to practice neurology there. And this chap never got over the fact that Viktor Frankl, coming out of the concentration camps with his whole family wiped out, would have given him, a member of the Nazi Party, work there. And I told Viktor Frankl, after I'd interviewed this neurologist, how grateful he was. He, in fact, took flowers to the Frankl home every Christmas for 50 years since the Holocaust, never missing it. And I told Frankl how grateful this neurologist was to him. And he said, but I didn't do anything so special. I just gave him work. And I said, but Victor, you had just come back from the concentration camps. And he defiantly said, so what? And all I did was give him a little bit of work. Actually, there's another important thing. When I was interviewing this neurologist, he broke down sobbing in front of me and then said I was a Nazi. And I told that to Viktor Frankl, and he said in his heart he was no Nazi.
Timidly, we looked around and glanced at each other questioningly. Then we ventured a few steps out of camp. This time the guards offered us cigarettes. We hardly recognized them at first. They had hurriedly changed into civilian clothes. We walked slowly along the road leading from the camp. Freedom, we repeated to ourselves. And yet we could not grasp it. We had said this word so often during all the years we dreamed about it, that it had lost its meaning. We came to meadows full of flowers. We saw and realized that they were there, but we had no feelings about them. The first spark of joy came when we saw a cockerel with a tail of multicolored feathers, but it remained only a spark. We did not yet belong to this world.
Frankl's wife, Tilly, died in the camps, and after the war, he married Ellie. She accompanied Viktor on his almost perpetual globe-trotting lecture tours. Ellie Frankl, Viktor's widow.
He hated to be being shown as a guru, never. So many people are projecting into someone something, you cannot change it. He was a very simple, bright man, but never a guru.
She became one of the major factors for him recovering his mission in life, to develop logotherapy, and with her help and support, I think he also recovered fully as a human being.
He used to say time and again, logotherapy basically is nothing new. He only put down what people have known all along, people from the street, simple people. He used to say, logos means meaning, and therapy means healing. Therefore, logotherapy is healing through meaning. This, of course, being an oversimplification. That's his words. It's an absolutely practical, down-to-earth therapy. We look at what is still healthy in a patient. We seek those little areas of freedom. We look at what can this person still do in the future to become what he really can be, rather than looking back and looking too much at the dark side. And that helps a lot of patients to realize as soon as they find a meaning in their life, something concrete. We're not talking about the meaning of life being something that comes from I don't know where, but very, very concrete meanings in life. And as soon as a patient has found this concrete meaning, he will try to overcome his own inhibitions. If a patient has found his meaning, there's not much you have to do as a therapist. These people, they come up with an incredible strength that you wouldn't believe that they had.
Viktor Frankl inspires and continues to inspire millions of people, and yet his beloved theory, logotherapy, remains almost completely unknown. Unlike Freud, he didn't groom disciples and excommunicate those who strayed from the righteous path. He toured America 92 times, but even so, there's a limit to what one man can do. His message was a simple one, which didn't appeal to specialists who prefer systems. And because he did talk in fables, and so closely linked his theory to his Holocaust experiences, he'd be a hard act for any disciple to follow. By leading patients to realize that there was a more meaningful way of looking at their lives, he was a prototype for the cognitive behaviorists who encourage patients to rewrite the stories of their lives, or at least the moral to be drawn from the tale. But ultimately, his theory, although timeless, was out of time. Unhappy people can find happiness if they take responsibility for their own actions. But it was a time when people were looking for someone else, a father, a mother, a subconscious, anyone to blame.
He was asked one time, Frankl, what is the meaning of your life? The meaning of my life is helping other people find the meaning of theirs.
It's a simple story. There's little to tell, and it may sound as if I'd invented it. But to me it seems like a poem. A young woman knew that she would die in the next few days, but when I talked to her, she was cheerful in spite of this knowledge. I am grateful that fate has hit me so hard, she told me. In my former life, I was spoiled and didn't take spiritual accomplishments seriously. Pointing through the window of the hut, she said, "This tree here is the only friend I have in my loneliness." Through that window she could see just one branch of a chestnut tree, and on the branch were 2 blossoms. "I often talk to this tree," she said to me. I was startled and didn't quite know how to take her words. Was she delirious? Did she have occasional hallucinations? Anxiously I asked her if the tree replied. Yes. What did it say to her? She answered. It said to me, "I am here. I am here. I am life. Eternal life."